They lived in a shack the town called shameful, mocked by neighbors who drove past in clean cars and whispered pity behind closed doors. But when Zai and Lambert finally opened the floor beneath their forest home, what they uncovered wasn't just $230 million. It was a secret so carefully guarded, so deliberately hidden, it would rewrite everything the world thought it knew about wealth, sacrifice, and what it truly means to protect something bigger than yourself. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The forest around Ridge Valley, Montana, stretched for miles in every direction, thick with pine and Douglas fir, the kind of wilderness that swallowed sound and kept secrets. Tucked deep within those trees, nearly 3 miles from the nearest paved road, sat a structure most people wouldn't dignify with the word home. It was a shack, plain and simple. Weathered wood siding that had long ago lost its original color. A tin roof patched with mismatched metal scraps. Windows that didn't quite fit their frames, and a porch that sagged on one side like a tired old man leaning on a cane. This was where Zai and Lambert had lived for 43 years. Zai was 71 now, small-framed with silver hair she kept in a long braid down her back. Her hands were weathered and strong, the kind of hands that had sewn 10,000 stitches, planted countless gardens, and built more than they'd ever broken. She moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned long ago that wasted motion was wasted life. Her eyes, dark and bright, missed nothing. Lambert was 74, tall even with the stoop age had given his shoulders. With a white beard he trimmed himself, using a small mirror nailed to a tree outside. His hands were enormous, scarred from decades of carpentry, each finger thick as a wrench handle. He spoke slowly, thoughtfully, and only when he had something worth saying. Folks in town used to joke that Lambert could build a house with nothing but a handsaw and sheer stubbornness. They didn't joke about him much anymore. Mostly they just felt sorry for him. The couple's morning routine never changed. Zai woke first, always had, slipping out of the quilts they'd stitched together from fabric scraps decades ago. She'd start the wood stove, its iron body cold from the mountain night, coaxing flame from kindling and yesterday's coals. The coffee was percolator style, grounds and water heated slow until the whole shack smelled like morning. Lambert would wake to that smell, dress in layers, flannel over thermal over work-worn skin, and join her at the small table they'd built together in 1981. They didn't have electricity, not the kind that came from poles and wires. They had solar panels Lambert had installed himself, jerry-rigged to a couple of batteries that powered 2 lamps and a radio. No television, no internet, no phone most of the time. Just the forest, each other, and the wind moving through the pines like breath through ancient lungs. People in Ridge Valley, the small town 15 miles down the mountain, talked about Zai and Lambert the way you talk about ghosts or old rumors. Whispered, exaggerated, rarely accurate. "They're crazy," someone would say at the diner. "Living like animals up there," another would add, shaking their head over eggs and toast. "I heard they don't even have running water." That last part was true. Water came from a spring-fed creek 50 yards from the shack, cold and clean year-round. Zai and Lambert hauled it in buckets, 5-gallon containers, whatever worked. In winter, when the creek froze over, they'd melt snow on the stove. It was work, sure, but it was their work. The mockery had started small, decades ago, and grown over time like moss on a stone. When Zai and Lambert first moved into the forest in 1982, people were curious. A young couple, 30s back then, choosing to leave town and live off-grid. It seemed romantic at first, adventurous even. But as the years piled up and the couple never left, never upgraded, never joined back into the world everyone else lived in, curiosity turned to judgment. They could get jobs, people muttered. Probably on drugs, someone suggested once, though there was never any evidence. Just gave up on life, was the prevailing theory. Children in Ridge Valley grew up hearing stories about the old hermits in the woods. Teenagers dared each other to hike up to the shack, to knock on the door, to peek through the windows. Most turned back halfway, spooked by the silence and the dark. The few who made it all the way usually found Zai in the garden or Lambert chopping wood, and the sight of real people, kind people who smiled and offered water, was enough to shatter whatever monster story they'd been told. But the damage was done. Zai and Lambert were the town's cautionary tale, the example parents used to scare their kids into staying in school, getting good jobs, contributing to society. "You don't want to end up like those two," mothers would say, pointing vaguely toward the mountains, and the message stuck. What no one in Ridge Valley knew, what no one had ever suspected, was that Zai and Lambert weren't living in poverty because they'd failed. They were living in simplicity because they were guarding something. Lambert's father, a man named Thomas, had been a different kind of person altogether. Born in 1923, Thomas grew up during the Depression, learned early that money was power and power was survival. He'd worked a dozen jobs by the time he was 20, saved every penny, invested carefully. By 1956, he owned a lumber mill, 2 hardware stores, and a significant piece of land outside Ridge Valley. He was, by all accounts, a shrewd businessman and a hard man to know. But in 1963, something happened that Thomas never talked about publicly. There was an incident, a federal investigation involving misappropriated funds from a government contract, something tangled and murky involving timber rights and post-war reconstruction efforts. Thomas wasn't directly implicated, but he knew people who were. And when the dust settled, a significant amount of money, bonds, and assets vanished from the official record. Thomas had hidden it, not stolen it, he'd insist to Lambert years later, protected it, kept it from being seized, lost, or destroyed in the chaos of federal overreach and political collapse. He'd taken that fortune, converted it into forms that would last: precious metals, bearer bonds, cash in sealed containers, rare coins, and buried it. Not in a bank, not in a safe, but in the earth itself, beneath a structure he'd built deep in the forest where no one would think to look. When Lambert was 28 years old, his father sat him down in the old mill office and told him everything, showed him maps, explained the history, and made him swear an oath. "This isn't ours to spend," Thomas had said, his voice hard as iron. "This is insurance, for when the system fails, for when people need it. You guard it, boy. You keep it safe until the time is right." Lambert, young and idealistic, had agreed. He thought he understood. He didn't. Not really. Not until he and Zai moved into that shack and felt the weight of the secret pressing down on them every single day for 4 decades. Zai hadn't known about the money when she married Lambert. She'd fallen in love with a carpenter, a quiet man with strong hands and a good heart. They'd married in 1979, a small ceremony, just family and a few friends. Lambert told her about the inheritance 6 months later, after they'd already started talking about buying land and building a life. "There's something I need to show you," he'd said one evening, his voice tight. She'd followed him into the woods, to the shack that was barely standing then, and watched as he lifted the floorboards. She'd seen the cases, the containers, the carefully wrapped bundles, and she'd understood immediately what it meant. Not wealth, burden. "We can't touch it," Lambert had said. "Not until the time is right." Zai had stared at the fortune beneath the floor, then at her husband's face lined with worry. "Then we live simply," she'd said. "We protect it, together." And that's exactly what they did. The town's mockery hurt more than either of them admitted. Zai's sister stopped visiting after 10 years, unable to bear the sight of her sibling living in what she called squalor. Lambert's cousins whispered that he'd wasted his father's legacy, squandered opportunity, thrown his life away. Holiday invitations stopped coming. Phone calls grew rare, then non-existent. By the time Zai and Lambert hit their 60s, they were functionally invisible. The town had written them off and they'd accepted it. It was easier that way, safer. But in the fall of 2023, things began to shift. It started with the cars. Zai noticed them first. Unfamiliar vehicles, dark sedans and SUVs, driving slowly past the trailhead that led up to their property. They never stopped long, never got out, just idled for a minute or two before driving away. It happened 3 times in 1 week. "Lambert," Zai said one evening as they sat on the porch, the sun setting orange through the pines. "Someone's watching." Lambert had noticed too. "Could be hikers." "Hikers don't drive cars like that." He nodded slowly. "I'll keep an eye out." The next incident was more direct. Zai found a note tucked under a rock near the spring. The paper was new, clean, and the handwriting was precise. It read, "We know what's buried. Time is running out." She brought it back to the shack, her hands shaking slightly. Lambert read it twice, his jaw tight. "Who knows?" Zai whispered. "I don't know," Lambert said, but his father's words echoed in his mind. Thomas had always warned him that secrets this big don't stay buried forever. People talk, records resurface, patterns emerge. Over the next month, the signs continued. Footprints near the property that didn't belong to them. A drone hovering overhead one afternoon, its camera eye pointed directly at the shack. Lambert threw a rock at it, missed, but it flew away. Zai started sleeping lighter, waking at every sound. Lambert reinforced the door, added a deadbolt he'd forged himself. They didn't talk about it much, but the fear was there, sitting between them at the table, lying beside them in bed. And then Lambert collapsed. It was a Tuesday morning in late November. Frost coated the ground, and the air smelled like snow. Lambert had gone out to split wood, same as he did every morning. Zai was inside kneading dough for bread when she heard the axe hit the ground with a dull thunk, followed by nothing. She ran outside and found him on his knees, one hand pressed to his chest, his face grey. "Lambert!" She dropped beside him, her hands on his shoulders. "I'm okay," he gasped. But he wasn't. His breathing was shallow, his pulse erratic under her fingertips. "We're going to the hospital," she said. No doctors, no questions." "I don't care!" Zai snapped, her voice sharp with terror. "You're going!" Getting him down the mountain was a nightmare. Zai half carried, half dragged him to the old pickup truck they kept under a tarp, a 1987 Ford that ran more on prayer than gasoline. She drove like she'd never driven before, fast and reckless down the dirt road, honking at every turn, her heart hammering in her chest. At Ridge Valley Medical Center, a small clinic with 6 beds and 2 doctors, they took Lambert back immediately. Zai sat in the waiting room, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles went white. She prayed, something she hadn't done in years, formless, desperate words thrown at a god she wasn't sure was listening. Dr. Sarah Brennan, young and competent, came out 2 hours later. "He's stable," she said. "It was a heart episode. Not a full heart attack, but close. His heart's under strain. Has he been under stress?" Zai almost laughed. Stress, 43 years of it. "He works hard," she said instead. "He needs rest, medication, and frankly, he needs to be somewhere with easier access to medical care. You're 3 miles into the forest. If this happens again, and you can't get him down." The doctor didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Zai sat with Lambert that night in the clinic room. He was asleep, hooked to monitors that beeped softly. She held his hand, feeling the calluses she'd known for decades, and made a decision. "We can't keep doing this," she whispered to his sleeping form. "We can't keep living like this. It's time." When Lambert woke the next morning, he found Zai sitting in the chair beside his bed, her face calm but resolved. "We need to tell someone," she said. Lambert blinked, his mind still foggy from medication. "What?" "About the money, about what's under the floor. We need to tell someone. We're too old for this, Lambert. You almost died. If something happens to both of us, it stays buried forever, and your father didn't hide it for it to rot in the ground." Lambert stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Okay," he said. "Okay." 2 days later, Lambert was released from the clinic with a bottle of pills and strict orders to rest. Zai drove them home in silence, the truck rattling over ruts and rocks. When they pulled up to the shack, the forest felt different. Not menacing, just waiting. They sat at their small table that night, a single lamp casting warm light over the worn wood. Between them lay a piece of paper and a pen. "Who do we tell?" Zai asked. Lambert thought for a long time. "Someone we can trust, someone who won't steal it." "Is there anyone like that left?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe." They made a list. It was short. There was Michael Torres, a lawyer in Ridge Valley who'd helped them with property taxes years ago. Honest, thorough, careful. There was Sheriff Donna Hayes, who'd always been fair, even when the town wasn't. And there was Father Patrick at the old Catholic church, who'd never judged them, never turned them away on the rare occasions they appeared for Christmas Mass. "We start with Michael," Lambert said. "Lawyers know how to keep secrets." Zai nodded. "And if he can't help? Then we go to the sheriff." "And if she can't?" Lambert reached across the table and took his wife's hand. "Then we go public. We tell the whole damn town. Let them see what we've been protecting all these years while they called us crazy." Zai squeezed his hand, and for the first time in months she smiled. The next morning, Zai walked into town. It was a 3-mile hike down the mountain road, and she didn't mind. The air was cold and clean, and the movement felt good. She wore her cleanest coat, a green canvas jacket she'd patched a dozen times, and carried a small bag over her shoulder. Ridge Valley hadn't changed much in 40 years. Same main street, same diner, same hardware store with the faded paint. People glanced at her as she walked past, some with curiosity, most with pity. She ignored them all. Michael Torres's office was above the post office, a narrow staircase leading to a single room with a desk, a filing cabinet, and a window overlooking the street. Michael was 56, grey at the temples, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up when Zai knocked, surprise crossing his face. "Zai, is everything okay?" "I need to talk to you," she said. "In private." He gestured to the chair across from his desk. She sat, suddenly aware of how out of place she looked, this old woman in patched clothes surrounded by law books and framed degrees. "What can I do for you?" Michael asked gently. Zai took a breath. "How good are you at keeping secrets?" Michael leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to professional curiosity. "Legally, I'm bound by attorney-client privilege. Whatever you tell me stays between us unless you give me permission otherwise." "Even if it's big?" "Especially if it's big." Zai nodded slowly. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out something small. She placed it on the desk between them. It was a coin. Gold, about the size of a silver dollar, with the profile of Lady Liberty on one side and an eagle on the other. The date stamped near the bottom read 1927. Michael leaned forward, his eyes widening. "Is this real?" "Yes," Zai said quietly. "And there are hundreds more where that came from, along with bonds, cash, and other things I don't fully understand. Buried beneath our home, worth somewhere around $230 million. Michael's mouth opened. No sound came out. Zai continued, her voice steady. "Lambert's father hid it there in the 1960s. We've been protecting it ever since. But Lambert's sick. We're getting old, and someone knows. Someone's been watching us. It's time to bring it into the light." Michael stared at the coin, then at Zai, then back at the coin. Finally, he whispered, "Holy hell." "Can you help us?" Zai asked. Michael picked up the coin with trembling fingers, held it to the light, examined the details. His legal mind was already racing through implications, tax law, estate issues, federal regulations. historical claims. "Yes," he said finally. "Yes, I can help you. But Zai, this is going to change everything. Your life, this town, everything." Zai stood slowly, her back straight, her eyes clear. "Good," she said. "We've been invisible long enough." She walked out of the office, down the narrow stairs and back into the street. People still stared, still whispered, still pitied the old woman in the patched coat. They had no idea what was coming. Back at the shack, Lambert was waiting on the porch, a blanket over his shoulders despite the afternoon sun. Zai climbed the steps and sat beside him. "Well?" he asked. "He believes us," she said. "He's going to help." Lambert nodded, his eyes on the forest stretching out before them. "You scared?" "Terrified," Zai admitted. "You?" "Yeah," he said, "but also relieved. We did what your father asked. We kept it safe." "For 43 years, Zai added. They sat in silence for a while, the wind moving through the pines, the world quiet and still around them. Somewhere in the distance, a raven called out, its voice echoing through the trees. Tomorrow, Michael Torres would begin the legal process. Within a week, experts would arrive to verify the collection. Within a month, the news would break. Within a year, everything would change. But right now, in this moment, Zai and Lambert were just two people sitting on a sagging porch in a weathered shack, holding hands, watching the light fade through the trees. They'd been called crazy, pitied, mocked, and forgotten. Soon, the world would know the truth, and it would be extraordinary. Michael Torres didn't sleep that night. He sat in his small apartment above the office, the gold coin on his kitchen table, a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched growing warm beside it. Every instinct he had as a lawyer told him this was going to be complicated, messy, potentially dangerous. Every instinct he had as a human being told him this was the biggest thing that would ever happen in Ridge Valley. He called Zai at dawn, using the emergency contact number she'd left, the number for the ranger station 2 miles from her property. "I'm coming up today," he said. "I need to see it. All of it." "Come afternoon," Zai replied. "Gives us time to prepare." Prepare meant something different to Zai and Lambert than it did to most people. It meant sweeping the floor, boiling water for coffee, and most importantly, working together to pry up the floorboards they hadn't fully removed in over a decade. The main hiding spot was beneath the center of the shack's single room, under what served as their living area. Lambert had built a false floor when they first moved in, seamless enough that you'd never notice unless you knew exactly where to look. 3 boards, each 2 feet wide, lifted out in sequence if you released the hidden catches he'd carved into the supports. Lambert knelt slowly, his chest still tender from the heart episode, and pressed his thumb into a knot in the wood. Something clicked. He moved to the second board, repeated the motion. Another click. Zai helped him with the third, her smaller fingers finding the catch more easily than his. Together, they lifted the boards. The smell that rose up was strange, not unpleasant, just old, dry, preserved, like opening a book that hadn't been read in decades. Beneath the floor was a space about 4 feet deep, carefully dug out and lined with treated wood to keep moisture away, and filling that space, stacked with almost surgical precision, were containers. Military-grade ammunition cases, the kind that sealed watertight, plastic bins with locking lids, canvas bags wrapped in multiple layers of heavy-duty plastic, each one labeled in Thomas's meticulous handwriting with codes only Lambert understood. "I forget sometimes," Lambert said quietly, staring down into the cache. "Forget it's really here." "I never forget," Zai said. "I feel it every time I walk across this floor." They'd opened it only a handful of times over the years. Once every 5 years or so, Lambert would check the seals, make sure nothing had degraded, rotate the positions of certain items. It was maintenance, not access. They'd never taken a single dollar, never even considered it. When Michael arrived just after 1 in the afternoon, Hiking up the trail with a leather satchel and the expression of a man walking into history, he found Zai and Lambert sitting on the porch, the door to the shack open behind them. "It's inside," Lambert said simply. Michael climbed the steps, nodded respectfully to both of them, and entered. The sight stopped him cold. The floor was open, the cash was visible, and even from the doorway, even with most of it still sealed in containers, the magnitude was obvious. "My God," he whispered. Lambert came up behind him. "My father was thorough." "Can I?" Michael gestured toward the nearest case. "That's why you're here." Michael set down his satchel, knelt carefully beside the opening, and reached for the closest ammunition case. The latches were stiff but functional. When he opened it, his breath caught. Cash, stacks of it, hundreds and fifties, bundled in bank wrappers that had yellowed with age. Each stack was $1,000. There were at least 50 stacks in this case alone. 50,000, Lambert said. "That's one of the smaller ones." Michael's hands shook as he closed that case and opened another. This one held bonds. Bearer bonds, the kind that functioned like cash, payable to whoever held them. The denominations made his head spin. $10,000 bonds, $25,000 bonds, some marked from the 1950s, others from the 1960s. A third case held coins. Gold eagles, double eagles, Liberty heads, St. Gordons. Each one in protective sleeves, each one worth thousands, maybe tens of thousands depending on condition and rarity. "How many cases are there?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lambert looked at Zai. She answered, 43. Different sizes, different contents. Michael sat back on his heels, his mind reeling. He was a small-town lawyer. He handled property disputes, simple wills, the occasional divorce. This was so far beyond his expertise, it might as well have been quantum physics. "I need help," he said finally. "We need specialists, authenticators, appraisers, tax attorneys, probably federal authorities." "No authorities," Lambert said sharply. "Not yet." Michael looked up at him. "Lambert, this is going to come out. There's no way to keep something like this quiet once we start the verification process." "I know," Lambert said, "but we control how it comes out. We decide who knows what and when. My father spent 40 years hiding this from the government. I'm not just handing it over." Michael understood. Thomas had hidden this fortune because he believed, rightly or wrongly, that it would be seized, redistributed, lost in bureaucracy. Whether that fear had been justified in 1963 was debatable. What mattered now was that Lambert and Zai had honored that wish for 4 decades. "Okay," Michael said slowly. "Then we start small. I know a numismatist in Billings, a coin expert, completely discreet. We send him photos, see what he thinks. If he can verify even a portion of this, we'll have leverage when we do eventually go public." Zai nodded. "We also need to know exactly what we have. My father-in-law kept records, but they're coded. Lambert knows most of it, but not everything." Lambert moved carefully to a small wooden chest in the corner of the shack, one of the few pieces of furniture they owned. From inside, he pulled out a leather journal, its cover cracked and worn. "This was Thomas's log," he said, handing it to Michael. "Every item, every denomination, every hiding spot. Some of it's in the floor, some of it's not." Michael's eyes widened. "There's more?" "There's always more," Lambert said with a slight smile. Over the next 3 hours, the 3 of them went through the journal page by page. Thomas's handwriting was small and precise, each entry dated and detailed. Michael took notes, his lawyer's mind trying to organize the chaos into something comprehensible. What emerged was staggering. The cash beneath the floor held approximately $18 million in cash, another $35 million in bearer bonds, and somewhere between $40 and $60 million in rare coins and precious metals, depending on current market values and condition. But that was just the beginning. Thomas had also buried items in other locations on the property. There were sealed tubes containing gold bars buried near the creek. There was a waterproof container hidden in a hollowed-out section of a specific tree, marked only by a small carved symbol. There were silver ingots wrapped in oilcloth and buried in a pattern that formed a triangle, each point exactly 100 feet from the shack. "He turned your entire property into a treasure map," Michael said, shaking his head in disbelief. "He was paranoid," Lambert admitted, "but also brilliant. He knew that if anyone found one cache, they'd assume that was it. They'd never think to keep looking." "How long will it take to recover everything?" Michael asked. Lambert looked at Zai. "If we work carefully, 2 weeks, maybe 3. And if word gets out before we're done?" "Then we lose it," Zai said simply. "People will come. With shovels, metal detectors, greed. They'll tear this place apart." Michael closed his journal and looked at them both. "Then we start tomorrow, just us 3. We document everything, photograph everything, secure everything. Once it's all accounted for, then we bring in experts. What happens next will shock the entire town and reveal why this couple chose to live this way for over 4 decades. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. The excavation began the next morning just after sunrise. Michael had brought supplies, heavy-duty plastic bins, silica gel packets to control moisture, a high-quality camera, and a metal detector he'd borrowed from a friend without explaining why. Lambert led them to the first secondary site, the creek. They walked single file through the pines, frost crunching under their boots, their breath forming clouds in the cold air. The creek was running low this time of year, exposing rocks and the clay bank. "There," Lambert said, pointing to a spot where 3 large stones formed a triangle. 18 inches down, dead center. Michael and Zai did the digging. Lambert's heart couldn't take the strain, much as he hated admitting it. They worked carefully, methodically, removing soil 1 shovelful at a time. At 16 inches, the shovel hit something solid. Michael dropped to his knees and brushed away dirt with his hands. A metal tube emerged about 3 feet long and 6 inches in diameter, sealed with heavy-duty caps on both ends. Getting it out took another 20 minutes. It was heavy, at least 80 pounds. They carried it between them back to the shack, set it on the porch, and Lambert showed them how to open the seal. Inside were gold bars. 10 of them, each one stamped with weights and purity marks. Each one worth approximately $60,000 at current gold prices. $600,000 buried by a creek, guarded only by 3 rocks and 40 years of silence. "This is insane," Michael muttered. "This is Thomas," Lambert replied. They found the tree cache next. The symbol carved into the bark was small, easy to miss if you didn't know to look for it. A simple cross with a circle around it. Lambert had to climb a ladder they'd fashioned from branches to reach the hollow, his movements slow and careful. Inside was a sealed PVC pipe. He lowered it down to Zai, who cradled it like something fragile and precious. This one held documents. Original stock certificates from companies that no longer existed. Land deeds from properties that had long since been sold or seized. Letters of credit from banks that had gone under in the 1980s, and tucked at the very bottom, a small leather pouch containing diamonds, rough diamonds, uncut, each one about the size of a pea. There were 37 of them. "Where did he get these?" Michael asked, his voice hushed. "I don't know," Lambert admitted. "He never said." The triangle of silver ingots took 2 days to excavate. Each point was exactly 100 feet from the shack, measured from the center post that supported the roof. They had to clear brush, dig through roots, and work around rocks. But at each point, 4 feet down, they found what Thomas had promised. Wrapped silver bars, each one 40 pounds, each one stamped with purity and serial numbers. 12 bars in total, nearly $500,000 in silver. By the end of the first week, they'd recovered everything Thomas had documented in his journal. The The shack was full of containers, stacked carefully, catalogued obsessively. Michael had photographed every item, created spreadsheets, cross-referenced the journal entries. The estimated total value kept climbing. 100 million, 150 million, 200 million. They were exhausted. Zai's hands were blistered from shoveling. Michael had lost 8 pounds and looked like he hadn't slept in days. Lambert moved slowly, his heart medication keeping him functional but tired. On the 8th day, as they sat on the porch reviewing the inventory, Michael asked the question that had been building in his mind since the beginning. Why did he do it? Why did Thomas hide all this instead of using it, investing it, living off it? Lambert was quiet for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small. A photograph, creased and faded, protected in a plastic sleeve. The photo showed a young man in a military uniform, 1940s era, standing beside an older couple. The resemblance was unmistakable. Thomas and his parents. "My grandfather lost everything in the Depression," Lambert said. "Lost his farm, his savings, his dignity, had to beg for work. My grandmother died in '34 from pneumonia they couldn't afford to treat. My grandfather never recovered, drank himself to death by 38. He paused, his thumb tracing the edge of the photograph. Thomas was 15 when his mother died, 20 when he buried his father. He built himself up from nothing, swore he'd never be vulnerable like that again. And when he saw what happened in the 60s, the government seizing assets, investigations destroying people, he made a choice. He'd rather bury it all than risk losing it." "But he never used it," Zai added softly. "Never enjoyed it. Worked until he died at 78, lived in a modest house, drove an old truck. The money was his insurance policy against a disaster that never came. Until it became our burden," Lambert finished. Michael absorbed this, understanding now the weight these two had carried. Thomas hadn't given them a fortune. He'd given them a responsibility, a secret, a sacrifice. "What was he waiting for?" Michael asked. "The right time," Lambert said. "He used to tell me, when the world needs it more than I do, that's when you release it." I never knew what he meant. Maybe he didn't either. "And now?" Michael pressed. Lambert looked at Zai. She nodded slightly. "Now the world does need it," Lambert said. "This town is dying, businesses closing, young people leaving, families struggling. We can change that. We can take Thomas's fear and turn it into something good. If we do this right," Zai added, "this money doesn't just belong to us. It belongs to everyone who's been forgotten, everyone who's struggling, everyone who's been told they don't matter." Michael felt something shift in his chest. This wasn't just about authenticating assets anymore. This was about legacy, about redemption, about taking something born from fear and transforming it into hope. "Then let's do it right," he said. The authentication process began quietly. Michael reached out to his contact in Billings, Dr. Raymond Chen, a numismatist with 40 years of experience and a reputation for discretion. Michael didn't explain everything over the phone, just said he had a collection that needed expert evaluation. Dr. Chen arrived on a Tuesday, driving a nondescript sedan up the mountain road, carrying a case full of specialized tools. He was 72, reed-thin, with gentle hands and sharp eyes behind thick glasses. When Lambert opened the first case of coins for him, Dr. Chen's professional composure cracked. "Where did you get these?" he whispered. "Family inheritance," Lambert said simply. Dr. Chen picked up a St. Gordon's double eagle from 1933, held it to the light, examined it with a jeweler's loupe, and set it down with trembling fingers. "Do you know what this is?" he asked. "A $20 gold piece," Lambert replied. "This particular coin, in this condition, is worth approximately $7 million, maybe more." The room went silent. "There are 6 more just like it in that case," Zai said quietly. Dr. Chen spent 3 days examining coins. He worked methodically, photographing each one, testing weights, checking authentication markers. He barely spoke except to occasionally mutter things like impossible or museum quality, or once simply, my God. When he finished, he sat at the small table, removed his glasses and rubbed his eyes. In 40 years of doing this work, he said, I've never seen a collection like this. The coins alone, just the coins, are worth somewhere between $60 and $80 million, possibly more at auction. Just the coins? Michael clarified. Just the coins, Dr. Chen confirmed. I haven't evaluated the bullion, the cash, or the bonds, but if the rest of the collection is consistent with what I've seen, you're looking at something north of 200 million, possibly 250 million. No one spoke for a long moment. I need to make some calls, Dr. Chen said finally. With your permission, I'd like to bring in specialists, currency experts, bond authenticators, precious metal assayers. This is too big for one person. Lambert looked at Michael, who nodded. Can they be trusted? I've worked with them for decades, Dr. Chen said. They're professionals. They understand discretion. Do it, Lambert said. Over the next 2 weeks, a quiet parade of experts made their way up the mountain. They came in unmarked cars, carried nondescript cases, signed non-disclosure agreements Michael had hastily drafted. Each one examined their specialty, took notes, provided valuations. The cash was relatively straightforward, 17,800,000 in various denominations, much of it old enough to have additional collectible value beyond face amount. The bonds were more complex. Some had matured decades ago and were now worth multiples of their face value with accumulated interest. Others were still active, still earning. Total estimated value, 38 million. The precious metals came in at 62 million after assaying confirmed purity and weights. The diamonds, after being sent out to a gemologist Dr. Chen trusted absolutely, came back valued at 3 million. And then there were the surprises. In one of the last cases they opened, Thomas had included stock certificates from a small technology company founded in 1978, a company that had eventually become one of the largest software manufacturers in the world. Those certificates, if they could be authenticated and reissued, were worth another 12 million. By the time every expert had finished, the total valuation sat at $234 million. $234 million, hidden beneath a shack the town called Shameful, guarded by a couple the world had mocked as failures. Michael sat with Lambert and Zai on the porch as the last expert drove away. The sun was setting, painting the pines gold and orange. What now? Michael asked. Now we decide what to do with it, Zai said. You could disappear, Michael offered. Take the money, leave Montana, start over somewhere warm and comfortable. Lambert shook his head. We didn't protect it for 43 years just to run away. Besides, this is our home. Then we go public, Michael said. We announce it, deal with the taxes, the attention, everything that comes with it. And we use it, Zai added. The way Thomas should have. The way we couldn't until now. Use it how? Michael asked, though he thought he already knew. Zai and Lambert looked at each other, having the kind of conversation only people who've been married for decades can have without words. This town needs help, Lambert said finally. Businesses need loans, families need support, the school needs funding, the clinic needs equipment. We fix Ridge Valley, Zai continued. We show people that money isn't meant to be hoarded or hidden. It's meant to be used to build things, help people, create opportunity. We turn Thomas's fear into our legacy, Lambert finished. Michael smiled despite the exhaustion pressing down on him. You know what's going to happen when word gets out, right? Everyone who ever mocked you, everyone who pitied you, they're all going to show up. They're going to want something. Let them come, Zai said quietly. We've been invisible for 43 years. Maybe it's time people finally saw us. Besides, Lambert added with a slight grin, we've been poor in a rich man's house. Might as well try being rich in a poor man's shack and see which one feels better. That night, after Michael had gone back to town to begin drafting press releases and legal documents, Zai and Lambert sat alone in their home. The floorboards were back in place, the cash secured once more. Everything was documented, photographed, authenticated. Tomorrow everything would change. "Are you scared?" Zai asked, her hand in Lambert's. "Terrified," he admitted, but also relieved. "We did what Dad asked. We kept it safe. Now we get to do what we want. Make it matter." 43 years, Zai murmured. "We gave up 43 years of comfort for this." "No," Lambert said gently. "We gave up 43 years of ease, but we never gave up comfort. We had each other. We had this forest. We had purpose. Money can't buy those things." Zai leaned her head on his shoulder. Outside, an owl called through the darkness, and somewhere distant, a creek moved over stones, constant and eternal. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," he replied. They sat like that for a long time, two people in a shack the world had dismissed, holding a fortune the world had forgotten, preparing to change everything while staying exactly who they'd always been. Tomorrow, the world would learn about the $234 million hidden in the forest. The story would spread like wildfire. News vans would arrive, questions would be asked, judgment would finally reverse. But tonight, they were just Zai and Lambert, 71 and 74, married for 46 years, sitting in the home they'd built together, watching shadows dance on walls that had kept their secrets safe for longer than most marriages lasted. And for the first time in decades, they allowed themselves to imagine what came next. Not for them, but for everyone else. For the single mother in Ridge Valley struggling to pay rent. For the teenager who wanted to go to college but couldn't afford it. For the small businesses barely hanging on. For the clinic that needed equipment. For the future that was possible when fear finally let go of money and allowed it to become what it was always meant to be, a tool for building something better. Thomas had buried a fortune to protect it from a world he didn't trust. Zai and Lambert were about to give it back to a world they believed could still be good. And that transformation, from hiding to healing, from fear to faith, from mockery to meaning, was worth more than $234 million. It was worth everything. The press release went out on a Thursday morning at 8. Michael had spent 3 sleepless nights crafting it, revising it, making sure every word was precise and legally sound. It was brief, almost understated, which somehow made it more powerful. Local couple reveals $234 million collection hidden for over 4 decades. Lambert and Zai announce plans to establish community foundation. He sent it to the Ridge Valley Gazette first, a small weekly paper run by a woman named Margaret, who'd been covering local news for 30 years. Then to the Billings Telegram. Then, because he knew it wouldn't stay local, to the Associated Press. By 9, Margaret was calling. By 10, the Billings paper had a reporter in a car heading toward Ridge Valley. By noon, the Associated Press had picked it up. By 3 in the afternoon, satellite trucks were setting up in the parking lot of the Ridge Valley Diner, their massive antennas reaching toward the sky like mechanical flowers blooming in concrete. Zai and Lambert watched it all from their porch, 3 miles away, insulated by forest and dirt road and sheer distance. "Here it comes," Lambert said quietly. "Here it comes," Zai echoed. The first person to arrive at the shack was unexpected. Not a reporter, not a government official, not even someone looking for money. It was Pastor Helen from the Methodist Church, a woman in her 60s who'd always waved kindly when she saw them in town, never judging, never pitying. She hiked up the trail carrying a covered dish and wearing sensible boots. "Figured you might not want to cook today," she said when Zai opened the door, slightly stunned. "Brought you some chicken casserole and biscuits." Zai's eyes filled with tears. "You didn't have to do that." "I know," Pastor Helen said. "But I wanted to. You two have been part of this community for over 40 years. even if folks didn't always see it. And now everyone's going to want a piece of you. Figured you could use a friend who just wants to bring dinner. She set the dish on the small table, gave Zai's hand a squeeze, and left without asking a single question about the money. Zai stood in the doorway watching her go, the casserole still warm in its dish, and realized something important. Not everyone in Ridge Valley had mocked them. Some people had simply let them be, had respected their choice, had offered quiet kindness when no one was watching. Those were the people who mattered. The second wave came an hour later. Cars started appearing at the bottom of the trail, unable to drive up the rough road, but parking as close as they could get. People hiked up, some out of curiosity, some out of genuine feeling, some out of something harder to name. Michael had stationed himself at the shack, running interference. He met people halfway down the trail, polite but firm. "Lambert and Zai appreciate your interest, but they're not giving interviews today. Can we just talk to them for a minute?" "Not today." "We're old friends. We just want to congratulate them. Leave your name and number with me. If they want to reach out, they will." By evening, Michael had collected 47 names. Some he recognized as people who'd genuinely known Zai and Lambert over the years. Others were strangers, opportunists, people who'd never hiked this trail in their lives, but suddenly had urgent business with the couple in the shack. That night, Zai made a list. She sat at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil, Lambert beside her, and wrote down every name she could remember of people who'd been kind to them over the years. People who'd nodded hello at the post office, who'd helped jump their truck battery in winter, who'd never said a cruel word or shared a pitying glance. The list was shorter than she'd hoped, but longer than she'd feared. 32 names. "These are the people we help first," she said. Lambert nodded. "And the rest?" "We'll figure it out," Zai said. "But these are the ones who saw us as people, not problems. They deserve to know we saw them too." The media circus intensified over the weekend. By Saturday, there were 6 news crews in Ridge Valley, transforming the tiny town into something it had never been. Nationally relevant. Reporters interviewed anyone who'd ever known Zai and Lambert, and suddenly everyone had a story. At the diner, a man named Curtis, who'd once fixed their truck tire, claimed they'd been close friends. "Always knew they were special," he told a camera crew, his face serious and sincere. In reality, he'd charged them $50 for a 10-minute repair and complained about it afterward. At the hardware store, the owner's son recounted how Lambert had been a master carpenter who'd helped build half the town. In truth, Lambert had been denied work repeatedly because people thought he was unreliable, too strange, too isolated. Zai watched the news coverage on Michael's laptop that evening, her face unreadable. "They're rewriting history," she said quietly. "People do that," Michael replied. "It's easier than admitting they were wrong." "Does it make you angry?" Lambert asked her. Zai thought about it. "No," she said finally. "It makes me sad. They're so desperate to be part of the story that they're lying about who they were. And the sad part is, if they'd just been honest, if they'd said, we didn't understand them and we were wrong, that would mean something. But this," she gestured at the screen, "this is just noise." On Monday, the relatives started arriving. Lambert's cousin Dwight, who hadn't spoken to him in 26 years, showed up with his wife and 3 adult children. They brought gifts, flowers, and a store-bought pie, and smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. "We've been so worried about you two," Dwight said, standing awkwardly in the small shack. "Living out here all alone." "We weren't alone," Lambert said. "We had each other." "Well, sure, but you know what I mean. Family should stick together." "We haven't heard from you since 1999, Zai pointed out, her voice level. "You told us we were embarrassing the family." Dwight's smile faltered. "I said that. I don't remember that." "I do," Lambert said quietly. "The visit didn't last long. Dwight and his family left with promises to stay in touch that everyone knew were empty. As their car disappeared down the mountain, Lambert turned to Zai. "That going to keep happening?" "Probably," she said. "You want me to tell Michael to screen them?" "No," Zai said after a moment. "Let them come. Let them show us who they are. We already know who we are." The government arrived on Tuesday, not with threats or demands, but with questions and paperwork. 2 agents from the Internal Revenue Service, a woman from the Treasury Department, and someone from the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives, though no one was quite sure why ATF was involved until they explained that some of Thomas's collection included collectible firearms that had been buried alongside the money. They set up in Michael's office, the small room suddenly crowded with people and documents and the weight of official inquiry. "We're not here to seize anything," the lead IRS agent, a tired-looking man named Peterson, explained. "We're here to help you comply with tax law and establish legitimate ownership." "How much are we going to owe?" Lambert asked directly. Peterson pulled out a calculator and several thick binders. "That depends on a lot of factors. How the assets are classified, whether they're inheritance or found property, what deductions apply, how you structure the distribution. But we're looking at somewhere between 40 and 60% of the total value." The room went silent. "So we keep 90 to 140 million, and the government takes the rest," Michael said, his voice tight. "That's a simplified version, but essentially yes," Peterson replied. "However, if you establish a charitable foundation, which I understand you're planning to do, there are significant tax advantages. You could potentially reduce the burden to 30 or 40% if structured correctly." Lambert looked at Zai. They'd known this was coming, had discussed it with Michael, but hearing the numbers out loud made it real. "We're fine with that," Zai said firmly. "The money was hidden for 43 years. It can afford to pay its dues." Over the next week, the legal framework began to take shape. Michael worked with tax attorneys from Billings and Denver, people who specialized in large estates and charitable foundations. They created something called the Thomas Lambert Memorial Foundation, named for Lambert's father and structured to support community development, education, healthcare, and small business growth in Ridge Valley and surrounding areas. The foundation would hold most of the assets, distributing them over time, ensuring sustainability. Lambert and Zai would take enough to live comfortably, pay off any personal taxes, and cover their needs. But the bulk, roughly 150 million after taxes, would go into the foundation. "You're giving it all away," one of the attorneys said, almost confused. "You could keep so much more." "We don't need more," Lambert replied. "We needed enough, and now we have it." But not everyone was pleased with their decision. The threat started on the 8th day after the announcement. The first was a letter, slipped under Michael's office door, typed on plain paper with no signature. "That money doesn't belong to you. Thomas stole it. Give it back or face consequences." The second was a phone call to the shack's emergency line, a man's voice, rough and angry. "You think you can just announce you're sitting on millions and nothing will happen? People are coming. Better watch your back." The third was more direct. Someone spray-painted "Thieves" across the side of Michael's car in the middle of the night. Sheriff Donna Hayes took the threats seriously. She was 58, a 30-year veteran of law enforcement, with grey hair cut short and eyes that missed nothing. She'd known Zai and Lambert by sight for years, had always thought of them as harmless eccentrics. Now she saw them as people who needed protection. "I'm stationing a deputy at the trailhead," she told them, sitting in their small shack, her uniform somehow making the space feel even smaller. "Anyone who wants to come up has to identify themselves first." "Is that necessary?" Zai asked. "Yes," Donna said bluntly. "You're sitting on a fortune in a shack with no locks worth mentioning, 3 miles from help. There are people in this world who'd kill for a fraction of what you have." We've been sitting on this fortune for 4 decades, Lambert pointed out. And no one knew about it, Donna countered. Now they do. Everything's changed. She was right, and they knew it. That night, Deputy Marcus Chen, a young officer barely 30, set up a post at the bottom of the trail with a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and instructions to log everyone who came up and went down. The presence of law enforcement changed the dynamic. Casual curiosity seekers stopped coming. The people who did make the hike were serious, purposeful, and usually had Michael's advance approval. But it also made everything feel more real, more dangerous. Zai found herself jumping at sounds in the night, at branches cracking in the wind, at the creak of old wood settling. Lambert slept with a hunting rifle by the bed, something he'd never done in 43 years. "I hate this," Zai said one night, lying awake beside him. "I hate feeling afraid in our own home." "Me too," Lambert admitted. "But it won't last forever. Once the money's transferred, once the foundation is established, once we're just caretakers instead of holders, it'll calm down." "Will it, though?" Zai asked. "Or will people always see us as the couple with the fortune?" Lambert didn't have an answer. The town meeting was Michael's idea. "You need to address people directly," he said. "Let them see you, hear from you, understand what you're planning. Rumors and speculation are making things worse." So on a cold evening in late December, 3 weeks after the initial announcement, Lambert and Zai walked into the Ridge Valley Community Center for the first time in over a decade. The room was packed. Every folding chair was filled. People stood along the walls, and the air was thick with body heat and anticipation. News cameras lined the back wall. The crowd went silent when they entered. Zai felt hundreds of eyes on her, judging, measuring, questioning. She wore her cleanest clothes, a flannel shirt and jeans, her silver braid down her back. Lambert beside her in his work boots and canvas jacket, his white beard neatly trimmed for the occasion. They looked exactly like what they were. Simple people thrust into extraordinary circumstances. Michael stood at the front beside a microphone. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "Lambert and Zai have asked to speak with you directly about the discovery, the foundation, and their plans. Please hold questions until the end." He stepped aside. Lambert moved to the microphone, Zai at his side. For a long moment, he just looked at the crowd. Faces he'd seen for years, people who'd ignored him, pitied him, mocked him. And scattered among them, the people who'd been kind. Pastor Helen in the 3rd row, the postal clerk who always had their mail ready, the teenager who'd once helped them push their truck out of mud without asking for payment. "My name is Lambert," he began, his voice rough but steady. "This is my wife, Zai. We've lived in the forest outside this town for 43 years. Most of you know us, or think you do. Some of you have been kind, some of you haven't. That's okay. We're not here for apologies or explanations." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "My father, Thomas, hid a fortune in the 1960s. He had his reasons born from fear and loss and a time in history when trust was scarce. He asked me to protect it, to keep it safe until it was needed. So Zai and I did. For 43 years we lived simply, not because we were poor, but because we were guardians." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "Now that fortune is coming into the light," Lambert continued. "After taxes and legal requirements, approximately $150 million will be placed in the Thomas Lambert Memorial Foundation. That foundation exists for one purpose, to help this community and others like it." Zai stepped closer to the microphone. "We know what it's like to be dismissed," she said, her voice quieter than Lambert's but no less firm. "To be judged, to feel invisible. For 43 years, this town looked at us and saw failures. That hurt. But it also taught us something important. We learned who we were without money defining us. We learned that wealth isn't about what you have, it's about what you do." She looked out at the crowd. So here's what we're going to do. The foundation will provide small business loans at low interest. It will fund scholarships for every high school graduate who wants one. It will donate to the medical clinic for equipment and services. It will support the volunteer fire department, the library, the food bank, and any community project that genuinely helps people. But, Lambert added, his voice firm, we're not a bank, we're not an ATM. This isn't about giving everyone a check and calling it done. This is about investing in people who want to build something, who want to work, who want to contribute. Applications will go through a board, Zai said. People we trust, people who understand this community, and decisions will be made carefully, fairly, with the long-term good in mind. Lambert leaned into the microphone one more time. We didn't ask for this. We didn't want attention or recognition. We just wanted to honor a promise and live our lives. But now that it's out there, we're going to make it count. This money is going to do what it should have done from the beginning. Help people, build things, create opportunity. And if you came here tonight hoping we'd write you a personal check, Zai added, a hint of steel in her voice, you're going to be disappointed. But if you came here because you have a dream, a plan, a business, a need that's genuine, then we want to hear from you, because that's what this is for. They stepped back from the microphone together. The room stayed silent for 3 full seconds. Then someone started clapping. Pastor Helen, standing up, her hands coming together firm and steady. Others joined, slowly at first, then building, until most of the room was applauding. Not everyone. Zai could see faces in the crowd that were angry, disappointed, calculating. People who'd come expecting something different. But enough people were clapping that it felt real. Felt like maybe, just maybe, this could work. During the question period, the real test came. A man stood up, someone Zai recognized from town but couldn't name. How do we know you're really going to use the money for the community? How do we know this isn't some scheme? Michael stepped forward. The foundation is being established as a 501c3 non-profit, which means it's subject to federal oversight and annual reporting requirements. Everything will be transparent and public record. A woman raised her hand. What about people who've been struggling for years, people who need help now? The foundation will begin accepting applications in January, Zai said. We're working as fast as we can to get systems in place, but we want to do it right, not fast. Another man, older, stood up. His voice shook slightly. My daughter needs surgery. Insurance won't cover it. Will the foundation help with medical expenses? Lambert nodded slowly. Medical needs are part of our mission. Have her submit an application. We'll review it. The man's eyes filled with tears. Thank you, he whispered. Question after question came, some genuine, some hostile, some simply curious. Lambert and Zai answered what they could, deferred to Michael on legal matters, and stayed calm throughout. But it was the last question that cut deepest. A young woman in her 20s stood up, her voice clear and direct. Why did you let us think you were poor? Why did you let people mock you, call you failures, treat you like you didn't matter? Why not just tell someone? The room went utterly silent. Zai looked at Lambert. He nodded slightly. She turned back to the young woman. Because the moment we told anyone, Zai said softly, we stopped being people and became a target. The moment money entered the equation, relationships changed. We've seen it already in the last 3 weeks. Relatives who ignored us for decades suddenly showing up. People we've never met claiming to be close friends. Strangers making threats. She paused, her voice thick with emotion. We let people think what they wanted because their opinions didn't define us. We knew who we were. We knew what we were protecting. And in a strange way, being invisible kept us safe. Kept the secret safe. But it cost us, Lambert added. Cost us relationships, acceptance, community. And maybe that was wrong. Maybe we should have trusted someone. But we made a choice, and we lived with it. And now we're trying to make it mean something. The young woman nodded slowly, understanding crossing her face. "Thank you for being honest," she said. After the meeting, as people filed out into the cold December night, a small group remained. Pastor Helen, the postal clerk, a few business owners, the school principal, people who'd been kind over the years. They approached Lambert and Zai without fanfare, without expectation. "We just wanted to say," the principal began, a woman named Diane, "that we're proud of what you're doing, and if you need help, community voices, people who know who really need support, we're here." Zai felt tears threatening. "Thank you," she managed. "This town hasn't always been good to you," Pastor Helen added, "but maybe this is a chance for all of us to be better." Walking back to Michael's car for the ride up the mountain, Lambert and Zai were quiet. The meeting had drained them both emotionally and physically. "That was harder than digging up buried gold," Lambert said finally. Zai laughed, a short, tired sound. "But necessary." "Do you think they believe us?" he asked. "Some do," Zai said. "Some won't until they see it, and some never will because they don't want to. But we did what we could." At the shack, Deputy Chen was waiting at his post. He waved them through with a smile. "How'd it go?" "We survived," Lambert said. "That's usually enough," Chen replied. Inside, they shed their coats and sat at their small table. The shack was cold, the fire having burned down to coals. Lambert rebuilt it while Zai made tea. They moved through the familiar motions, finding comfort in routine. "I keep thinking about Thomas," Lambert said as they sat with steaming mugs between their hands, "wondering if this is what he wanted, if giving it away would make him angry or proud." "He was a complicated man," Zai said, "but I think deep down he wanted it to matter. He just didn't know how to let go of the fear long enough to use it." "We're letting go for him," Lambert said. "We are," Zai agreed. Over the following weeks, the intensity gradually decreased. The news crews left when no new scandals emerged. The curious tourists found other attractions. Life in Ridge Valley began to return to something resembling normal, though everything had fundamentally changed. The foundation offices opened in January, in a renovated storefront on Main Street. Michael hired staff, an administrator, an accountant, and a community liaison. The board of directors was established: Pastor Helen, Principal Diane, Sheriff Donna, a local business owner named Marcus, and two people from neighboring towns who brought outside perspective. Lambert and Zai served as co-founders, but not as board members. They wanted distance, wanted the foundation to function independently, to outlive them. The first round of applications came in. Hundreds of them. People requesting business loans, scholarship applications, medical assistance, community project funding. The board reviewed each one carefully, investigating claims, checking references, trying to separate genuine need from opportunism. The first scholarship was awarded to a girl named Maya, 18, daughter of a single father who worked 3 jobs. She wanted to study nursing. The foundation gave her full tuition, room and board, and a stipend for books and supplies. When Michael called to tell her, she cried on the phone for 10 minutes straight. The first business loan went to a young couple trying to open a bakery in a building that had sat empty for 5 years. $15,000 at 3% interest, payable over 5 years. The bakery opened in March, filled the street with the smell of fresh bread, and hired 4 people within the first month. The medical clinic received a donation of $250,000 for new equipment and to subsidize care for uninsured patients. The volunteer fire department got new equipment. The library got funds for renovations and a computer center. Slowly, visibly, Ridge Valley began to change. But not everyone was happy. There were people who'd applied and been denied, whose requests were seen as frivolous or unsupported by evidence. There were those who felt entitled to more, who thought their friendship or family connection should guarantee support. There were complaints, accusations of favoritism, whispers that the foundation was just another way for Lambert and Zai to control people. One night in February, someone threw a rock through the foundation office window. Attached to it was a note, playing God with stolen money. Sheriff Donner investigated but found no leads. The window was replaced, security was increased, and the work continued. Through it all, Lambert and Zai stayed steady. They attended board meetings but didn't dominate them. They listened to community concerns but didn't try to fix everything themselves. They'd learned, over 43 years of silence, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is step back and trust others. In March, something unexpected happened. Dwight, Lambert's cousin who'd shown up looking for a handout, returned. But this time he came alone, without his family, without gifts or pretense. He found Lambert chopping wood outside the shack. "Can we talk?" Dwight asked. Lambert set down his axe. "Sure." They sat on the porch steps, the spring sun warm on their faces. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Dwight began, "about what I said to you back in '99, about how I acted when I heard about the money. And I need to apologize, not because I want something, but because I was wrong. I judged you for living out here, thought you'd given up, thought you were an embarrassment, but you were doing something I never could. You were keeping a promise, living with integrity, and I'm sorry I couldn't see that." Lambert looked at his cousin, seeing the sincerity in his face, the regret. "I appreciate that," Lambert said quietly. "I don't expect anything," Dwight continued. "Don't want anything. I just needed you to know that some of us are learning. Better late than never, right?" Lambert smiled. "Better late than never." They talked for an hour, carefully rebuilding something that had been broken for decades. When Dwight left, he and Lambert shook hands, and there was genuine warmth in it. Zai had watched from inside. "You think he meant it?" she asked when Dwight was gone. "Yeah," Lambert said. "I do. People can change. Take some longer than others, but they can." Spring turned to summer. The foundation awarded its 50th grant. The bakery expanded. Maya sent a letter from college thanking them and reporting straight A's. The clinic treated its 1,000th subsidized patient, and quietly, without fanfare, Ridge Valley began to feel different, more hopeful, more connected. There was still poverty, still struggle, still problems money alone couldn't fix. But there was also possibility now, opportunity, and the understanding that someone believed in them enough to invest. Lambert and Zai still lived in their shack. They'd made some improvements, better insulation, a new roof, a proper wood stove. But they didn't move, didn't upgrade to something grander. This was their home, and all the money in the world couldn't make them love it more than they already did. One evening in July, as they sat on their porch watching fireflies dance in the darkness, Zai said, "Do you think we did the right thing?" Lambert considered the question. "I think we did the only thing that felt honest. Thomas hid money out of fear. We released it out of faith. Whether that's right or wrong, I guess time will tell." "I don't regret it," Zai said. "Me neither," Lambert agreed. In the distance they could hear the sound of the creek, constant and eternal. Above them, stars emerged one by one, ancient light traveling impossible distances to reach their eyes. They'd been mocked for living in a forest shack, been called failures, crazy embarrassments. They'd carried a $234 million secret for 43 years, sacrificed comfort and acceptance to honor a promise. And now, finally, they were seeing what that sacrifice could become. Not wealth for themselves, but transformation for everyone around them. It wasn't perfect. There were still people who resented them, still threats that came occasionally, still moments of doubt and difficulty. But there was also something else now, something they'd lived without for so long they'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Community, belonging, purpose that extended beyond survival. "I'm glad we told," Zai said softly. "Even with everything that came after. I'm glad people finally know." Lambert reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining the way they had for 46 years of marriage. "Me too," he said. And sitting there in the gathering darkness, in a shack the world had dismissed, with a fortune being dispersed into a community that had once rejected them, they felt something they hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not because the struggle was over, but because they'd finally transformed the burden they'd carried into something beautiful. They'd turned their father's fear into faith, their isolation into investment, their mockery into meaning. And in doing so, they'd proven something essential: that true wealth isn't measured in what you accumulate, but in what you release. Not in what you hoard, but in what you give. Not in how the world sees you, but in how clearly you see yourself. The couple who'd lived like paupers while guarding a king's ransom had chosen to be neither. They'd chosen to be stewards, guardians, believers in a better future. And Ridge Valley, slowly but surely, was learning to believe too. The first anniversary of the announcement arrived in November, and Ridge Valley was unrecognizable from the town it had been 12 months earlier. The changes weren't dramatic in the way skyscrapers or shopping malls would be dramatic. They were quieter, deeper, the kind of transformation that happened in hearts before it showed up in structures. But it showed up nonetheless. Main Street, which had been slowly dying for 2 decades, now had 7 new businesses. The bakery that had been the foundation's first loan had expanded twice. Beside it, a coffee shop opened, then a bookstore, then a small restaurant that served locally sourced food and employed 12 people. Each business had received support from the Thomas Lambert Memorial Foundation. Loans, grants, mentorship, connections. The high school graduation rate, which had been hovering around 68% for years, jumped to 84%. The foundation had hired tutors, provided resources, and most importantly, given students something to work toward. Every graduate knew that if they wanted college, trade school, or professional training, the foundation would help make it happen. The medical clinic had treated over 3,000 patients in the first year, many of whom would have gone without care otherwise. Dr. Sarah Brennan, who'd treated Lambert's heart episode, now had 3 additional doctors on staff and equipment that rivaled facilities in cities 10 times Ridge Valley's size. But the numbers, as impressive as they were, didn't capture the real story. The real story was in the small moments, the individual lives changed, the hope rekindled in places where hope had been a luxury no one could afford. Maria Sanchez was 32, a single mother of 3 who'd been working double shifts at the diner for 6 years just to keep her kids fed and housed. She'd always dreamed of opening her own restaurant, had notebooks full of recipes her grandmother had taught her, but dreams don't pay rent, and banks don't give loans to people with more ambition than collateral. She applied to the foundation in February with a business plan she'd typed on a borrowed laptop, her hands shaking as she submitted it. The application asked what she wanted to build and why. She wrote about her grandmother, about wanting to pass down tradition, about believing that good food could bring people together even when everything else pushed them apart. The foundation approved her request in March. $40,000, enough to lease a small space, buy equipment, and hire 2 part-time employees. By May, Maria's cocina was open, filling Ridge Valley with the smell of fresh tortillas and slow-cooked mole. Zai and Lambert attended the opening, standing in the back of the crowded restaurant, watching Maria greet customers with tears streaming down her face. "This is what it's for," Zai whispered to Lambert. "This moment right here." Jacob Martinez was 19, the son of a ranch hand, and the first person in his family who'd ever considered college. He was smart, brilliant actually, especially with numbers and systems. His teachers had been telling him for years he should be an engineer. But his family needed his income, and college seemed like something that happened to other people, people with resources and options. When the foundation announced scholarships, Jacob's mother practically forced him to apply. He wrote his essay longhand because he didn't have a computer, explaining that he wanted to design sustainable water systems for rural communities, places like Ridge Valley that struggled with infrastructure and resources. The foundation gave him a full ride to Montana State University with a stipend for living expenses and a promise that they'd hire him summers to work on local projects. His first summer back, Jacob helped redesign the water distribution system for 3 county ranches, reducing waste by 40% and saving families thousands of dollars in costs. He was 20 years old, already making a difference, already proving that investment in people-paid returns no bank could measure. Thomas and Evelyn Reed had been married for 47 years. They'd run a small hardware store on Main Street since 1984, barely breaking even most years, going into debt during bad years. They were in their 70s now, tired, ready to retire, but the store was worthless. Who'd buy a failing business in a dying town? They applied to the foundation not for a loan but for a buyer. They explained they wanted to retire, wanted to pass the store to someone who'd keep it alive, serve the community. They asked if the foundation knew anyone interested. The foundation did something unexpected. They bought the store themselves, paid Thomas and Evelyn a fair price, then turned around and sold it to a young couple from Billings for half what they'd paid, with a low-interest loan covering the difference. The young couple brought new energy, new inventory, new ideas. The hardware store stabilized, then thrived. Thomas and Evelyn retired to a small house on the edge of town, their savings secure, their legacy intact. "We thought we'd die behind that counter," Evelyn told Zai when they ran into each other at the post office. "Now we get to actually enjoy our last years. Your foundation gave us that." Zai had hugged her, both women crying in the middle of the post office while the clerk pretended not to notice. These stories multiplied throughout the year, each one unique, each one proof that the foundation wasn't just moving money around, but genuinely changing trajectories. It wasn't charity in the condescending sense. It was investment in the patient, strategic, thoughtful sense. It was belief made tangible. But the transformation wasn't limited to those who received direct support. Something else was happening in Ridge Valley, something harder to quantify, but equally powerful. The town was remembering how to care about itself. For years, maybe decades, Ridge Valley had been a place people left if they could and endured if they couldn't. The attitude was defeatist, resigned, quietly bitter. Businesses failed, and no one tried to revive them. Young people graduated and disappeared. The unofficial town motto seemed to be, "It is what it is." But now something had shifted. When a business opened, people actually showed up to support it. When a student got a scholarship, the whole town celebrated. When someone needed help, neighbors organized before foundation support even arrived. Zai noticed it first at the grocery store. She'd gone in to buy flour and coffee, standard items she'd been buying for decades. The checkout clerk, a woman named Denise who'd never been particularly warm, smiled genuinely when Zai approached. "Heard the foundation helped my niece with her medical bills," Denise said. "She's got that autoimmune thing, couldn't afford her medication. Now she can, so thank you." "The foundation helped," Zai corrected gently, "but you're welcome." "No," Denise said firmly. "You and Lambert made the foundation. You could have taken that money and disappeared, bought a mansion somewhere warm, but you stayed. You chose us. That means something." Later, walking back to where Michael was parked, Zai told Lambert about the exchange. "People are starting to understand," she said. "It's not about the money, it's about the choice." "The choice to stay," Lambert agreed. "To invest in community even when community wasn't always kind to us." "Especially then," Zai added. But not everyone had transformed. There were still people who resented Lambert and Zai, who believed the money should have been distributed differently, who felt entitled to more or angry they'd been denied. Human nature doesn't change overnight, and a year wasn't long enough to heal all wounds or reshape all perspectives. Dean Cooper was one of those people. He'd been a vocal critic from the beginning, convinced that Lambert and Zai were hoarding money that should be his. His reasoning was convoluted. His grandfather had worked for Thomas's lumber mill in the 60s, therefore the family was owed something. He'd applied to the foundation 3 times, each request more desperate and less coherent than the last. Each time he was denied. By October, his resentment had calcified into something darker. He started showing up at foundation events, standing in the back with his arms crossed, radiating hostility. He wrote angry letters to the newspaper. He tried to organize a protest, though only 2 people showed up. Sheriff Donner kept an eye on him, warned him twice about harassment, but Dean stayed just inside the boundaries of legal behavior. Barely. Then, in early November, the foundation office was vandalized again. Not just a broken window this time, but spray paint across the entire front wall. The words scrawled in red: "Stolen money, fake charity, judgment coming." Security footage caught Dean on camera, his face clearly visible, his hand holding the paint can. Donner arrested him the next morning. He didn't resist, just went quietly, looking almost relieved that his anger had finally reached a conclusion. At his arraignment, standing before Judge Patricia Odom, Dean was given a choice: jail time or community service and mandatory counseling. "I'm tired of locking people up for being angry," Judge Odom said. "You're going to work 200 hours at the community center, and you're going to talk to someone about why you think destruction is an appropriate response to disappointment. Maybe you'll learn something." Dean scowled but agreed. He started his community service the following week, showing up surly and resentful, doing the minimum required. But something unexpected happened. Working at the community center meant being around the people the foundation was helping. He saw Maria setting up cooking classes for low-income families, teaching kids how to make healthy meals on tight budgets. He saw Jacob presenting his water system designs to ranchers, young and passionate and brilliant. He saw Pastor Helen organizing support groups for families struggling with addiction, medical crises, unemployment. Slowly, reluctantly, Dean began to understand. This wasn't about him. It never had been. The foundation existed for people who were trying to build something, contribute something, become something more than their circumstances suggested was possible. Dean wasn't building anything. He was just angry that life hadn't given him what he thought he deserved. His counselor, a patient woman named Dr. Lisa Rodriguez, asked him one day, "What would you do if the foundation gave you money right now? What would you build?" Dean opened his mouth to answer and realized he didn't have one. He'd spent so much time being angry about what he didn't have that he'd never actually thought about what he'd do if he got it. "I don't know," he admitted. "Then that's where we start," Dr. Rodriguez said. "Figure out what you actually want, what you'd actually build. Then maybe you'll understand why the foundation says no to people who can't answer that question." By December, Dean had completed his community service hours. Judge Odom asked if he'd learned anything. "Yeah," Dean said quietly. "I learned I was angry at the wrong people. Lambert and Zai didn't take anything from me. I just convinced myself they did, because it was easier than admitting I hadn't done much with my own life." The judge nodded. "That's growth. Don't waste it." Dean left the courthouse and did something he'd sworn he'd never do. He walked to the foundation office and asked to speak with Lambert. They met in a small conference room, just the 2 of them. Dean looked nervous, his hands fidgeting with his coat zipper. "I owe you an apology," Dean said, "for the vandalism, for the harassment, for being an asshole. I was wrong." Lambert studied him for a long moment. Apology accepted. "I don't expect anything," Dean continued. "I'm not here asking for money or help or anything else. I just needed to say it. You and Zai, you did something good, and I tried to tear it down because I was bitter. That was wrong. Lambert leaned forward slightly. Can I ask you something? Dean nodded. What do you want to do with your life? Not what you think you're owed, but what you actually want to build. Dean was quiet for a long time. I used to be good with engines, he said finally. Not cars, but small engines. Lawnmowers, generators, that kind of thing. I could take them apart and put them back together blindfolded, but there's no money in it, so I stopped. What if there was? Lambert asked. What do you mean? What if someone helped you start a small engine repair business? Gave you space, tools, startup costs. You could serve the community, ranchers, homeowners, people who can't afford new equipment. Make a living doing something you're actually good at. Dean stared at him. After everything I did, you'd help me. The foundation might, Lambert corrected. If you put together a real plan, showed you were serious, demonstrated you understood what it meant to serve a community instead of just taking from it. People can change, Dean. I've seen it happen. But you have to want to. Dean left that meeting with an application and something he hadn't felt in years: possibility. By spring, his small engine repair shop was open in a converted garage. It wasn't big or glamorous, but it was his, and he was good at it. Better than good, actually. People started bringing him equipment from 3 counties over. He hired an assistant. He started teaching repair classes at the high school. The man who'd vandalized the foundation office became one of its success stories, not because he was given a handout, but because he was given a chance and chose to take it seriously. Zai and Lambert's life, meanwhile, remained remarkably unchanged. They still lived in the shack, still hauled water from the creek, still chopped wood and grew vegetables and lived by the rhythms of the forest. They had money now, more than they needed, but it didn't alter who they were. They'd upgraded a few things: better insulation, a more efficient wood stove, solar panels that actually worked consistently. Lambert had built Zai a proper greenhouse so she could grow vegetables year-round. They'd bought a newer truck, though newer meant a 2010 Ford instead of an 87. But they didn't move to town, didn't build a mansion, didn't suddenly start living large. Why would we? Zai said when a reporter asked her about it during a foundation anniversary interview. We chose this life 43 years ago, and we still choose it now. Money doesn't change what makes us happy. The reporter, a young woman from Billings, looked around the modest shack with barely concealed confusion. But you could afford anything: a big house, luxury cars, travel, anything you wanted. We have what we want, Lambert said simply. Each other, our home, purpose. What would a bigger house add to that? The interview aired statewide and went viral online. People were fascinated by the elderly couple who'd rather live in a forest shack than a mansion despite having the means to live anywhere. Some thought it was admirable. Some thought it was crazy. Zai and Lambert didn't care either way. People spend their whole lives chasing comfort, Zai told Lambert one evening. Then wonder why they're not happy. We learned the secret accidentally. Comfort and happiness aren't the same thing. Their days developed a new rhythm that balanced their old life with their new responsibilities. Mornings were still theirs: coffee on the porch, garden work, maintenance, the quiet routines they'd built over decades. Afternoons, they'd drive into town for foundation meetings, community events, the work of stewardship. They attended every scholarship award ceremony, shaking hands with nervous teenagers and proud parents. They showed up at ribbon cuttings for new businesses, standing in back, clapping, never taking credit. They visited the clinic, the school, the community center, staying visible but not dominant, present but not controlling. We're witnesses, Lambert explained to Michael one day. We're here to see what the money does, make sure it's being used right, but not to control every decision. That's what Thomas got wrong. He held on so tight he couldn't let the money serve its purpose. We're trying to hold it lightly. By the 2nd anniversary, the foundation had distributed over $70 million in loans, grants, scholarships, and community investments. The remaining money continued to grow through careful investing, ensuring sustainability for decades to come. Ridge Valley had been transformed from a dying rural town into something rare, a community that believed in itself. The population had actually increased for the first time in 30 years. Young people were staying or returning. Businesses were opening faster than they were closing. There was energy in the air, possibility, hope. But the most profound changes were in the relationships, the social fabric of the town itself. People who'd been divided by class, age, or circumstance found common ground in community projects. The foundation's success wasn't just about money deployed, but about connections forged. When the bakery needed help during a staff shortage, 3 other businesses sent employees to pitch in. When a family lost their home to fire, the community organized before the foundation could even respond, providing temporary housing and supplies. Ridge Valley was learning to be a community again, not just a collection of people who happened to live near each other. Zai saw it most clearly at the events she attended. The way people talked to each other now, not past each other. The way ideas were shared instead of hoarded. The way success was celebrated collectively instead of envied privately. "This is what wealth actually looks like," she told Lambert after a particularly moving scholarship ceremony where 5 students received full rides to various colleges. Not the money itself, but what happens when people believe in each other. There were still challenges, of course. The foundation made mistakes. Some businesses failed despite support. Some individuals squandered opportunities. Not every story had a happy ending. A restaurant that received funding closed after 8 months, the owner overwhelmed by the demands of running a business. A student who received a scholarship dropped out of college after 1 semester, discovering that academic life wasn't for them. A community project to renovate a historic building ran over budget and behind schedule, creating frustration and finger-pointing. But the foundation learned from each failure, adjusted procedures, improved vetting processes, added mentorship and support structures. Michael often said that the foundation's real success wasn't in never failing, but in failing forward, learning, adapting, getting better. Lambert and Zai's health remained a concern. Lambert's heart condition required regular monitoring and medication. Zai developed arthritis in her hands, making some tasks painful. They were in their 70s now, and time was catching up with bodies that had worked hard for decades. But they stayed active, stayed engaged, stayed present. When Dr. Brennan suggested Lambert take it easier, he smiled and said, "I've been taking it easy for 43 years. Now I've got work to do." The foundation's 3rd anniversary brought unexpected recognition. The governor of Montana visited Ridge Valley to present Lambert and Zai with the state's Humanitarian Award. News crews returned, not for scandal, but for celebration. The story of the elderly couple who'd transformed a town became a national example of community-based philanthropy done right. Lambert and Zai accepted the award politely, but remained uncomfortable with the attention. They tried to redirect credit to the foundation staff, the board, the community itself. "We just opened the door," Zai said during her acceptance speech. "Everyone else walked through it and built something beautiful." But even as they deflected praise, their influence was undeniable. Other communities started reaching out, asking how Ridge Valley had accomplished what it had. Other philanthropists studied the foundation's model. Universities invited Lambert and Zai to speak, though they usually declined. "We're not teachers," Lambert told one persistent professor. "We're just people who kept a promise and tried to honor it right. Anyone could do what we did if they were willing to live simply and think long-term." "That's exactly why you should share your story," the professor replied, "because anyone could do it, but almost no one does." Eventually, they agreed to a few speaking engagements, mostly at small colleges or community groups. They never accepted payment, never sought publicity, never tried to build a platform. They simply shared their story, the burden they'd carried, the choice they'd made, the community they'd helped rebuild. Their message was consistent and simple. Wealth isn't about accumulation, it's about circulation. Money held tight becomes a prison. Money released becomes a tool. The measure of a fortune isn't what you keep, but what you give away and what it builds. Young people especially responded to their story. In a world of influencers and billionaires flaunting excess, Lambert and Zai represented something different: humility, purpose, service. They showed that you could have money and still have values, that you could be successful and still be simple, that you could transform the world without transforming yourself into something unrecognizable. A student at one of their talks asked, "Don't you ever wish you'd kept more for yourselves, lived in luxury for at least a few years?" Lambert looked at Zai. She smiled. He turned back to the student. "We have everything we need," he said. "We wake up in a home we built with our own hands. We drink coffee as the sun rises through pine trees. We work on projects that help people. We go to bed knowing we lived a day that mattered. What luxury is better than that?" The student had no answer. As the years progressed, Lambert and Zai began thinking about succession, about what would happen to the foundation when they were gone. They worked with Michael and the board to ensure the foundation's mission and values were codified, protected, sustainable without their direct involvement. They established an endowment structure that would allow the foundation to operate indefinitely. They recruited younger board members who understood both the history and the vision. They created policies and procedures that would outlive any individual personality. "We won't be here forever," Zai told the board during a planning session. "But the foundation needs to be. Ridge Valley needs to be. The work needs to continue long after we're gone." In their 80s now, Lambert and Zai moved a bit slower, tired a bit easier, but their minds remained sharp and their commitment unwavering. They still lived in the shack, still attended foundation events, still showed up for the community they'd chosen to serve. On their 50th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a celebration. Not because of the money, but because people genuinely loved them. The couple who'd once been mocked as failures were now honored as heroes. The shack that had been called shameful was now visited by people who wanted to see where the transformation had started. Lambert and Zai stood together in the community center, surrounded by hundreds of people whose lives they'd touched, directly or indirectly. Maria's restaurant had catered the event. Jacob, now a successful engineer, gave a speech about how the foundation had changed his trajectory. Dean Cooper, running a thriving repair business, thanked them for seeing potential in someone who'd only shown them anger. One by one, people shared stories. A single mother who'd gone back to school and become a teacher. A veteran who'd started a non-profit supporting other veterans. A young artist who'd received a grant and now had work in galleries across the state. Teenagers who'd gotten scholarships and were now in college, graduate school, or successful careers. The lives touched, the trajectories changed, the hope restored. Pastor Helen, now in her 80s herself, stood to speak. When Lambert and Zai came forward with their secret 3 years ago, some people said it was about money. But it was never about money. It was about trust. They trusted us to be better than we'd been, trusted us to see possibility instead of limitation, trusted us to build instead of tear down. And because they trusted us, we learned to trust ourselves. She looked directly at Lambert and Zai. "You didn't just give us resources, you gave us belief, and that's the gift that keeps multiplying." Later, after the celebration had ended and the community center had emptied, Lambert and Zai walked slowly back to Michael's car. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black sky like diamonds on velvet. 50 years, Zai said softly. "We've been together 50 years. "Best decision I ever made," Lambert replied, "asking you to marry me." "Second best," Zai corrected with a smile. First was keeping your father's secret and choosing to release it when the time was right. Lambert laughed. I think those might be tied. They drove up the mountain in comfortable silence, the truck's headlights cutting through the darkness, familiar shapes emerging and disappearing. When they reached the shack, Deputy Chen, still pulling occasional security duty, though the threats had long since stopped, waved them through. Inside, Lambert rebuilt the fire while Zai made tea. They sat at their small table, the same one they'd built in '81, scarred by decades of use but still solid, still functional. Do you have any regrets? Lambert asked. Zai thought about it. I regret the years we were invisible. I regret that we couldn't share the burden with anyone. I regret that Thomas died still afraid, still unable to release what he'd worked so hard to protect. But do I regret keeping the secret? No. Do I regret how we released it? No. Do I regret staying here, living simply, serving the community? Absolutely not. Me neither, Lambert said, though I sometimes wonder what would have happened if we'd told someone earlier, if we'd trusted the world a bit more. Maybe it wasn't the right time, Zai offered. Maybe we needed to age into wisdom. Maybe the community needed to decline enough to appreciate what was offered. Timing matters. They sat in silence for a while, sipping tea, listening to the fire crackle and the wind move through the pines. What do you think happens next? Lambert asked. After we're gone? The foundation continues, Zai said confidently. We've built it to last. The community continues to grow. People continue to help each other. Our part of the story ends, but the story itself keeps going. That's all we can ask for, Lambert agreed. Outside, an owl called, its voice echoing through the forest. Somewhere in the distance, the creek moved over stones, patient and eternal. The same sounds they'd heard for 50 years, unchanged by money or recognition or transformation. In the morning, they'd wake before dawn as they always had. Zai would start the fire, Lambert would make coffee. They'd sit on the porch and watch the sun rise through the trees, painting the forest gold. Then they'd go into town, attend a foundation meeting, maybe visit the school or the clinic, check on projects and people they cared about. Their routine would continue, simple and purposeful, until it couldn't anymore. And when their time finally came, they'd leave behind more than money or buildings or programs. They'd leave behind a changed community, transformed relationships, and proof that true wealth has nothing to do with what you accumulate and everything to do with what you release. They'd leave behind a legacy that whispered, live simply, love deeply, guard what matters, and when the time is right, give it all away with joy. Years later, when students studied the Thomas Lambert Memorial Foundation in economics classes or sociology courses, they'd learn about the mechanics, the legal structures, the investment strategies, the distribution models. They'd analyze the numbers and the outcomes and the sustainability. But the real lesson, the one that couldn't be captured in spreadsheets or case studies, was simpler and more profound. Two people had carried a secret for 43 years. They'd been mocked, dismissed, and forgotten. They'd lived in voluntary simplicity while sitting on a fortune. And when they finally revealed what they'd been protecting, they didn't use it to elevate themselves. They used it to lift everyone around them. They proved that character matters more than comfort, that values outlast valuables, that the richest life isn't measured in dollars, but in dignity. They showed that anyone can choose integrity over ease, that anyone can protect something bigger than themselves, that anyone can transform mockery into meaning if they're patient enough to wait for the right moment and brave enough to act when it arrives. And perhaps most importantly, they demonstrated that wealth's true purpose isn't accumulation or display or security. Wealth's purpose is circulation, investment, and the patient work of building community when community has forgotten how to build itself. The couple who'd lived like paupers while guarding a king's ransom had been neither poor nor rich in the ways that mattered most. They'd been faithful to a promise, faithful to each other, faithful to the belief that people and places deserve second chances, third chances, as many chances as it takes to get it right. Sitting in their forest shack on a cold November evening, their 80s settling into their bones, their hearts full of peace, Lambert and Zai understood what Thomas had never quite grasped, that the fortune buried in the earth had never been the point. The point had always been what you did when you finally brought it into the light. You could hoard it, fear it, let it define and confine you. Or you could release it with gratitude, watch it multiply through generosity, and discover that the less tightly you hold on to wealth, the more wealth transforms into something that actually matters. Legacy, community, hope, purpose. These are the things that last when everything else has crumbled to dust. And Lambert and Zai, the couple who'd been mocked for living in a forest shack, had built a legacy that would outlive them by generations. Not because they'd found a fortune, but because they'd understood what to do with it. They'd turned fear into faith, burden into blessing, and $234 million into proof that the world can still be good if good people are willing to believe in it. Anyone can change the world if they're stubborn enough to guard what matters and brave enough to give it away when the time is right. True wealth was never about the fortune hidden beneath their floor. True wealth was the courage to reveal it, the wisdom to release it, and the faith that their community would rise to meet the moment. As the last light faded from the Montana sky and stars emerged one by one over the forest shack, Lambert and Zai sat together in the home they'd built with their own hands, holders of a secret no more, guardians of a legacy that would echo through generations. They'd been called failures, mocked as crazy, dismissed as irrelevant. But in the end, they'd proven something essential, that the strongest foundations aren't built with steel and concrete. They're built with character, humility, and the quiet conviction that sacrifice today can become transformation tomorrow. The couple who'd lived like paupers while protecting a fortune had become the richest people in Ridge Valley, not because of what they'd found, but because of what they'd chosen to become. And that choice, repeated every day for 43 years in the silence of the forest and finally revealed in the light of community, was worth more than any amount of money could ever measure. Because for Lambert and Zai, and for everyone whose lives they touched, true wealth was never hidden beneath the floorboards. It was woven into every choice to serve instead of be served, to give instead of take, to build instead of hoard. And that kind of wealth, that never runs out. It only multiplies generation after generation, life after life, proving that sometimes the people the world dismisses as failures are actually the ones showing us all how to succeed. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful true stories waiting for you. Click to keep discovering with us. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe true wealth is measured in character, not currency.